The morning of September 19th, 1944 breaks cold over the rolling farmland east of Harcourt, France. Through the morning mist, Sergeant Joseph Grimm peers through the periscope of his M10 tank destroyer, scanning the tree line 1,500 yards to the east. The air smells of wet earth and diesel fuel. His crew loader, gunner, driver sit in silence, waiting. They've been in France for 6 weeks now, and they've learned that silence is the sound that precedes violence. Then he sees it, the distinctive angular silhouette of a Panther tank emerging from the shadows of the forest. Then another. Then 3 more. 5 Panthers, advancing in a loose formation across open ground. Grimm feels his stomach tighten. Every American tanker in Europe knows the Panther's reputation. Its 75mm gun can kill a Sherman at 2,000 yards. Its sloped frontal armor is nearly impervious to American tank guns at combat ranges. And here, at 1,500 yards, conventional wisdom says Grimm's 3-inch gun shouldn't be able to penetrate that armor at all. But conventional wisdom, Grimm is about to prove, has failed to account for something the Germans never anticipated: that American metallurgy and British ballistics science could transform a gun the Wehrmacht dismissed as inadequate into something that could rewrite the rules of armoured combat in northwestern Europe. What happens in the next 4 minutes will force German tank commanders to recalculate every tactical assumption they've made about American armour. The M10 Wolverine, derided by German intelligence as unterrüstet, undergunned, is about to demonstrate that sometimes the weapon you underestimate is the one that kills you. This is the story of how American tank destroyer crews turned German confidence into a fatal miscalculation, and how a gun that wasn't supposed to work became one of the most effective Panther killers of the war's final year. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. To understand what happens at Harcourt, you must first understand what the Panther tank represented to the Wehrmacht by the autumn of 1944, not just as a machine, but as an article of faith. The Panzer Kampfwagen V Panther entered combat in July 1943 at the Battle of Kursk. It was Germany's answer to the Soviet 34, designed explicitly to counter the shock of encountering a tank that combined sloped armor, a powerful gun, and mechanical reliability in a single package. The Panther's specifications seemed to guarantee German armoured superiority for years to come. Frontal armour 80mm thick at 55 degrees of slope, creating an effective thickness of 140mm. A 75mm KV-2L/70 gun, capable of penetrating 138mm of armour at 1,000 metres, a top speed of 46 km per hour on roads. But the Panther's real power wasn't in these specifications, it was in the psychological advantage they created. By mid-1944, German tank commanders had internalized a simple tactical calculus. At ranges beyond 1,000 meters, the Panther was effectively invulnerable to American tank guns. The standard American 75mm M3 gun, mounted on the M4 Sherman, and could only reliably penetrate the Panther's frontal armor at ranges under 500 meters, and only then if the Sherman crew survived long enough to get that close. German training manuals emphasized this advantage. Panzer commanders were taught to engage American armor at maximum range, where their superiority in optics and gun performance would allow them to destroy multiple enemy tanks before the Americans could close to effective range. The M10 tank destroyer fit neatly into this German understanding of American capabilities. German intelligence had encountered M10s in Italy in 1943 and assessed them as marginally more dangerous than Shermans, but fundamentally constrained by the same limitations. The M10's 3-inch M7 gun was indeed more powerful than the Sherman's 75mm, but German ballistics assessments concluded that at combat ranges beyond 1,000 meters, it still couldn't reliably penetrate a Panther's frontal armor. The M10's open-topped turret and thin armor, 57mm at the thickest point, made it especially vulnerable to the Panther's gun. In German tactical doctrine, The M10 was classified as a supporting vehicle, useful for ambushes against lighter German armor, but not a threat to Panthers or Tigers in open combat. This assessment wasn't entirely wrong. The original M10, equipped with the 3-inch M7 gun-firing standard M79 armor-piercing ammunition, would indeed struggle to penetrate Panther frontally at 1,500 yards. The problem was that by September 1944, German intelligence was operating with information that was 6 months out of date, and in the rapid evolution of armored warfare, 6 months was enough time for everything to change. The change began not in American factories, but in British research laboratories. By late 1943, British scientists working on armor-piercing projectile design had developed a new type of ammunition, armor-piercing capped ballistic cap, or APCBC. The innovation lay in the projectile's construction. Traditional armor-piercing rounds often shattered on impact with sloped armor, their hardened steel cores unable to maintain integrity under the shock of oblique impact. The APCBC round solved this problem through elegant engineering, a soft metal cap that crushed on impact, normalizing the angle of penetration, a hardened penetrator core, and a ballistic cap that improved aerodynamic performance, maintaining velocity over longer ranges. The British began producing APCBC ammunition for their 17-pounder anti-tank gun in early 1944. American ordnance officers, observing British tests, immediately recognized the potential. The 3-inch M7 gun used by the M10 had nearly identical ballistics to the British 17-pounder. If the British could produce APCBC ammunition effective against Panthers, so could the Americans. The result was the M62 APCBC round, which began reaching American tank destroyer battalions in France in August 1944. The M62's performance characteristics transformed the M10's capabilities. Where the older M79 round would achieve roughly 89 mm of penetration at 1,000 yards, the M62 could penetrate 127 mm at the same range. More critically, the M62 maintained its penetration capability at extended ranges. At 1,500 yards, the range at which German doctrine said the Panther was safe from American tank guns, the M62 could still penetrate approximately 109 mm of armor. The Panther's frontal glacis plate, despite its 55-degree slope, presented an effective thickness of approximately 140 mm. This should have been enough. But German metallurgy, stressed by material shortages and the demands of mass production, was beginning to fail. By late 1944, German armor plate quality had declined significantly. Molybdenum, manganese, and nickel, the alloys that gave armor plate its hardness and resistance to cracking, were in desperately short supply. German steel mills compensated by increasing carbon content, but this made the armor more brittle. Plates that should have been ductile enough to absorb kinetic energy instead shattered or spalled on impact. The Americans didn't know this. German tank commanders didn't know this, but at Aracourt on September 19, 1944. The material reality of German industrial collapse and American metallurgical innovation were about to collide with German tactical doctrine, and doctrine was about to lose. Sergeant Grimm's M10 is part of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armoured Division. The 704th has been in continuous combat since late June, landing at Utah Beach 2 weeks after D-Day. They've fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, where the close terrain and limited visibility made long-range gunnery irrelevant, and survival depended on hearing the enemy before you saw them. They pursued retreating German forces across France, their M10S racing forward with the 4th Armoured's tank columns, occasionally engaging German rearguards, but more often simply driving east, day after day, as fast as their engines could carry them. The fighting around Aracourt is different. The terrain here is open rolling farmland with patches of forest, long sight lines, the kind of ground where superior optics and gun range determine the outcome. This is Panther country. And the Panthers have arrived in force. The German 5th Panzer Army, attempting to halt the American advance toward the German border, concentrated its armoured forces around Aracourt. The 113th Panzer Brigade, equipped with new Panthers fresh from the factories, has orders to destroy the 4th Armoured Division and drive the Americans back across the Moselle River. German commanders are confident. On paper, they have the advantage, Panthers against Shermans and M10s, in terrain that favours long-range gunnery. What they don't know, what they cannot know, because German intelligence hasn't yet grasped the significance of the M62 round, is that the rules have changed. Grimm's gunner, Corporal Robert Hayes, tracks the lead Panther through his telescopic sight. 1,500 yards is extreme range for tank combat, but Hayes is one of the battalion's best gunners. He's learned to read the wind, to adjust for the slight drop in the round's trajectory over long distances, to compensate for the target's movement. The Panther is moving slowly, perhaps 15 kilometers per hour, angling slightly to the left. Hayes calculates the lead time, adjusts his sight picture, and waits for Grimm's order. Gunner, AP, tank, Grimm says, using the standard fire command. His voice is calm, almost conversational. Fear is a luxury you can't afford when 5 Panthers are bearing down on your position. Identified, Hayes responds. Fire. The 3-inch gun roars. The M10's entire hull rocks backward from the recoil, the massive breech assembly slamming back into the fighting compartment. The crew waits. At this range, it takes nearly 2 seconds for the round to reach the target. 2 seconds is an eternity. Grimm keeps his eyes on the Panther, watching for the telltale flash that indicates a hit, or the puff of dust that means a miss. The round strikes the Panther's frontal glacis, slightly left of centre. For an instant, nothing happens, and then the Panther lurches to a stop, smoke beginning to pour from its engine deck. The crew bails out, tumbling from the hatches, running for the tree line. Grimm feels a surge of something he can't quite name, elation mixed with disbelief. At 1,500 yards, the math wasn't supposed to work, but the Panther is burning. Target destroyed, Hayes says quietly. Traversing to the second target. The other M10s in Grimm's platoon have opened fire now. 2 more Panthers are hit in rapid succession. One throws a track and veers into a ditch. Another simply stops, its turret frozen in place, the crew already abandoning the vehicle. The remaining German tanks, faced with effective long-range fire from weapons they believed couldn't harm them, break off the attack and withdraw to the tree line. The entire engagement has lasted less than 4 minutes. Grimm climbs out of his commander's hatch and stands on the turret roof, surveying the field. 3 Panthers destroyed or disabled at ranges where they should have been invulnerable. He thinks about the training he received back in the United States, the doctrine that said tank destroyers were defensive weapons, designed to stop enemy armour through ambush and concealment, not to engage in long-range duels with German heavy tanks. The doctrine was wrong, or perhaps the world had changed and the doctrine hadn't caught up yet. What Grimm doesn't know, what he won't know until after the war, when intelligence officers pieced together captured German documents, is that the 3 Panthers his platoon just destroyed belonged to an elite unit whose commanders had been teaching their crews, right up until this morning, that American tank destroyers were no threat at extended ranges. Those commanders are now dead or running for their lives, and their certainty died with them. The Battle of Aracourt continues for another 10 days, and the pattern established on September 19th repeats itself with brutal consistency. German Panthers advance, expecting to dominate the engagement at long range. American M10s, positioned on high ground or hull down behind hedgerows, engage at ranges between 1,000 and 2,000 yards. The Panthers burn. German after-action reports, recovered after the war, reveal a growing panic among Panzer commanders. One report from the 113th Panzer Brigade, dated September 23rd, states, "Enemy anti-tank weapons are achieving penetrations at ranges previously thought impossible. Our frontal armour is no longer providing adequate protection. Recommend immediate tactical reassessment." The reassessment never comes. By the time German intelligence recognizes that American ammunition has improved dramatically, the 113th Panzer Brigade has been effectively destroyed. Of the approximately 100 Panthers committed to the battle, 86 are knocked out or abandoned. American losses are significantly lower. The 4th Armored Division loses fewer than 30 tanks and tank destroyers during the entire engagement. The disparity isn't just about the M62 round, though that ammunition is the technical foundation of American success. It's about doctrine, training, and the accumulated wisdom of crews who have learned to use their equipment effectively. American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized long-range gunnery, concealment, and firing from prepared positions. M10 crews trained obsessively on range estimation and first-round accuracy, because doctrine taught them they might only get one shot before having to displace. This training, combined with superior American optics and the M62 round's improved performance, created a weapons system that exceeded its paper specifications. German doctrine, by contrast, had become rigid. Panzer tactics emphasized aggressive maneuver and shock action, predicated on the assumption of technical superiority. When that superiority evaporated, when American guns proved capable of killing Panthers at ranges where Panthers were supposed to be safe, German commanders struggled to adapt. Some units tried to close the range, trading mobility for the chance to get within certain killing distance of American positions. This exposed them to concentrated fire from multiple M10s and allowed American crews to engage them at ranges where even the older M79 ammunition was effective. Other units tried to maintain long-range engagements, only to discover that American guns now had comparable or superior range. There was no good answer, no tactical adjustment that could compensate for the collapse of the fundamental assumption German technical superiority on which all their tactics depended. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Impact on German tank crews was profound and measurable. Interrogations of captured Panzer crewmen from the Arcourt battles reveal a recurring theme: shock at the effectiveness of American anti-tank weapons and a fundamental loss of confidence in their own armor's protective capabilities. One Panther commander, captured after his tank was knocked out by an M10 at 1,700 yards, told his interrogators, "We were taught that our frontal armor was proof against American tank guns at this range. When I saw the round penetrate, I thought perhaps it was a new American tank we hadn't encountered before. When they told me it was only an M10, I didn't believe them." This loss of confidence cascaded through the Panzerwaffe. Veterans of the Eastern Front, where German armor had dominated Soviet tanks in the war's early years, found themselves facing American weapons that seemed to improve with each engagement. The comfortable certainties of 1941 and 1942 that German optics were superior, that German armor was thicker, that German guns hit harder no longer applied. The Americans had closed the technical gap and, in some areas, surged ahead. For German tank crews already exhausted by years of continuous combat and demoralized by the endless retreat from France toward Germany, this realization was crushing. The M10's success at Arcourt wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the autumn of 1944, as American forces pushed toward the German border, M10 battalions racked up impressive kill ratios against German armor. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion alone is credited with destroying or disabling over 100 German armoured vehicles between June and December 1944, with the majority of these kills occurring at ranges beyond 1,000 yards. The 803rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, fighting with the 1st Infantry Division, achieved similar results. Contemporary American after-action reports consistently note that M10 crews, equipped with M62 ammunition, could reliably engage and destroy Panthers at ranges where the Panthers' return fire was less effective due to declining German gunnery standards and crew training. This success came despite the M10's significant vulnerabilities. The open-topped turret, while providing excellent visibility, exposed the crew to artillery airbursts, small arms fire, and shrapnel. The thin armor meant that any penetrating hit was likely to be catastrophic. M10 crews learned to fight from concealment, using terrain and prepared positions to offset their vehicle's lack of protection. They learned to fire and displace rapidly, never staying in one position long enough for German artillery to range in. They learned, in essence, to fight smart rather than fight tough, a doctrine that American armor would carry forward into the Cold War. But the M10's moment of glory was brief. By early 1945, the M36 Jackson, essentially an M10 chassis with a 90mm gun, was replacing M10s in many tank destroyer battalions. The 90mm gun could penetrate any German tank's armor at combat ranges, including the Tiger II's formidable frontal plate. The M10, with its 3-inch gun, was increasingly seen as obsolete, adequate for engaging Panthers but marginal against the heaviest German armor. This assessment missed something important. The M10's success wasn't primarily about gun performance or armor thickness. It was about crews who understood their equipment's limitations and learned to maximize its strengths. It was about ammunition designers who solved complex metallurgical and ballistics problems to give that gun performance it hadn't been designed to achieve. It was about doctrine that emphasized training, accuracy, and intelligent positioning over brute force. The M10 worked because the system around it worked, because American military culture in 1944 had developed mechanisms for rapid adaptation and continuous improvement that German military culture, for all its emphasis on tactical excellence, had not. Sergeant Joseph Grimm survived the war. He returned to Ohio in 1945, married his girlfriend from before the war, worked as a machinist, and raised 3 children. He almost never talked about his combat experience. When he did, usually late at night, usually after a few drinks, he would fixate not on the battles but on the strange feeling of certainty he'd experienced that morning at Aracourt, the certainty that his gun would penetrate, that the math would work, that the Germans had miscalculated. He couldn't articulate why he'd felt that certainty. The numbers said it shouldn't work. The doctrine said it shouldn't work. But he'd trusted his gunner, trusted his ammunition, and fired anyway. And it worked. "I think about those German tank commanders," he told his son in 1973, near the end of his life. What it must have felt like, that moment when they realized their armor wouldn't protect them anymore, when everything they'd been taught was wrong. That must have been terrifying. His son asked if Grimm felt sorry for them. Grimm thought about it for a long time. "No," he said finally. "They started the war. They chose to invade half of Europe, but I understand what it feels like when the rules change and nobody tells you. I understand that terror. We just happened to be on the side where the rules changed in our favor. The M10 Wolverine's legacy is complicated. By the metrics of post-war analysis, it was obsolete by the time it achieved its greatest successes. Its 3-inch gun was underpowered compared to later American 90mm guns or British 17-pounders. Its armor was inadequate. Its open-topped turret was a design flaw that cost lives. Modern armor historians often dismiss it as a stopgap measure, a vehicle that served adequately but never excelled. This assessment is both true and profoundly misleading. The M10 excelled at Aracourt precisely because it was good enough, because its gun, when given the right ammunition, could kill Panthers at range, because its crews were well-trained and tactically competent, because American doctrine knew how to employ it effectively. Excellence isn't always about having the best specifications. Sometimes it's about having adequate specifications and superior execution. The Germans never fully grasped this lesson. Even in the war's final months, as the Reich collapsed and German industry struggled to produce even basic equipment, German military culture remained fixated on technical superiority. The King Tiger tank, introduced in early 1944, mounted an 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at extreme range and featured frontal armor up to 180mm thick. On paper, it was the ultimate tank. In practice, it was mechanically unreliable, consumed fuel at a rate that made sustained operations impossible, and was so heavy that it broke bridges and couldn't maneuver in the soft terrain common in northwestern Europe. Germany produced fewer than 500 King Tigers during the entire war. The United States produced nearly 50,000 M4 Shermans. The contrast illustrates the fundamental difference in how the two nations approached armored warfare by 1944. Germany still believed that superior technology would compensate for numerical inferiority. America had learned that adequate technology, produced in overwhelming quantities and employed by well-trained crews following sound doctrine, would win battles more reliably than small numbers of technically superior but operationally limited vehicles. The M10's success at Aracourt was, in this sense, a microcosm of the war's outcome. German confidence, built on early victories and technical achievements, ran headlong into American adaptability, industrial capacity, and the cumulative learning of units that had been in combat continuously for months. The Germans expected to dominate the engagement because they always had. The Americans won because they'd learned how to fight the war that was actually happening, not the war their pre-war doctrine had anticipated. In the years after the war, military historians would analyze Aracourt as a classic example of combined arms warfare, with tank destroyers, tanks, artillery, and air support working in coordination to defeat a numerically inferior but technically superior enemy force. This analysis is accurate but bloodless. It treats the battle as a problem in geometry and firepower, strips away the human element, the fear and uncertainty and improvisation that characterized combat at the tactical level. Sergeant Grimm's moment at Aracourt, the decision to fire at 1,500 yards, the 2 seconds of waiting as the round flew toward the target, the shock of seeing the Panther burn contained none of the clarity that post-war analysis imposes. He didn't know the M62 round's precise penetration values. He didn't know that German armor quality had declined, or that his gun's performance exceeded doctrinal expectations. He knew only that his orders were to engage enemy armor, that his gunner was competent, and that not firing meant the Panthers would eventually close to a range where the engagement would be entirely one-sided. He fired, and the math worked. But it worked for reasons he didn't fully understand, using technology whose development he knew nothing about, exploiting vulnerabilities in German production that no one had told him existed. This is how most victories happen in war, not through perfect knowledge and flawless execution, but through adequate knowledge, decent execution, and the accumulated advantage of being on the side whose industrial base and adaptive capacity outmatches the enemy's. The M10 Wolverine killed Panthers at Aracourt because American metallurgists in 1944 solved problems that British researchers had identified in 1943, because American ordnance officers recognized an opportunity and pushed M62 ammunition into production quickly enough to reach combat units before the autumn offensive, because American training doctrine emphasized gunnery skills and tactical employment over raw vehicle performance. German armor quality had declined due to material shortages that were themselves consequences of Allied bombing and the loss of access to key resources. Because, in the end, America in 1944 had more industrial capacity, better logistics, superior intelligence, and enough trained crews to maintain continuous pressure on an enemy whose advantages were evaporating with each passing month. These are not the kinds of factors that fit easily into dramatic narratives about tank combat. There's no single heroic decision, no brilliant tactical innovation that explains Aracourt. There is only the grinding accumulation of small advantages, the compound interest of competent execution, the slow revelation that the Germans' certainty about their own superiority was based on information that had become fatally out of date. The Panther tank remained, on paper, a formidable weapon, until Germany's surrender in May 1945. Its gun still had excellent range and penetration. Its armor, when properly manufactured, still provided good protection against most Allied tank guns. But the Panther crew's confidence, the psychological advantage that came from knowing you could kill the enemy before he could kill you, never fully recovered from battles like Aracourt. Captured German documents from late 1944 and early 1945 show a consistent pattern. Panzer commanders requesting more infantry support, more artillery, more air cover, anything to compensate for their lost advantage in armor versus armor combat. They'd learned that American guns could kill Panthers at range, and that knowledge changed how they fought. They became more cautious, more defensive, less willing to take the aggressive maneuver risks that German armor doctrine had always emphasized. This psychological shift was, in some ways, more damaging than the material losses. Tanks are ultimately just platforms for guns and armor. Their effectiveness depends not just on their specifications, but on the confidence and aggression of their crews. A Panther commanded by a crew that believed in its invulnerability was a dangerous weapon. A Panther commanded by a crew that knew American tank destroyers could kill it at 1,500 yards was just another target, vulnerable and mortal like everything else on the battlefield. Sergeant Grimm and his crew never knew the full significance of what they'd accomplished that morning at Aracourt. They filed their after-action report, 3 enemy tanks destroyed at extended range, and moved on to the next engagement. They fought through the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, where their M10s helped blunt German armoured spearheads trying to break through to Antwerp. They crossed into Germany in March 1945, part of the final drive toward Berlin. They survived, which was the only victory that mattered to them personally. But their shots at Aracourt echoed through the German Panzer for the rest of the war. Every Panther commander who heard about Aracourt learned that American tank destroyers were more dangerous than German intelligence had assessed. Every tactical decision made by German armor in the war's final months had to account for the possibility that American guns could reach out and kill Panthers at ranges where Panthers were supposed to be safe. The comfortable certainties of German technical superiority, already eroding throughout 1944, suffered another blow. Wars are won through accumulation of material advantages, of tactical lessons learned, of small victories that compound into larger ones. Aracourt was one of those small victories. A few dozen tank destroyers, firing ammunition that most crews had only received a few weeks earlier, destroyed or disabled a German armoured brigade that should have been superior in every technical category. The engagement doesn't appear in popular histories of World War II. There are no monuments to it, no famous photographs, no dramatic Hollywood recreations. It was simply one more battle in the long, grinding advance toward Germany's borders, distinguished only by the fact that it demonstrated, in clear and unambiguous terms, that American armor could win against Germany's best tanks in open combat. The lesson took time to propagate through both armies. German intelligence didn't immediately grasp the significance of the M62 round. American commanders didn't immediately recognize that their tank destroyers now had the capability to engage Panthers at extreme range. But the lesson was there, written in the burned-out hulks of Panthers scattered across the fields around Aracourt, waiting for the generals and the historians to catch up with what the crews already knew, that the Germans had underestimated American capabilities, and that underestimation was fatal. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.